A black woman walks into a billion-dollar boardroom. 10 minutes later, she's mistaken for the assistant and asked to serve coffee. What happens next? No one saw coming. Stay with me, because this isn't just a comeback, it's a takeover. Jasmine Carter, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that hugged her frame with elegant authority, stepped out of a sleek black car and entered the towering glass doors of Stanton Enterprises, a name etched into the world of billion-dollar tech. The sunlight bounced off the 60-story steel and glass structure, a symbol of power, innovation, and until now, a history of leadership dominated by the predictable, white, male, and middle-aged. But today, that narrative was silently about to be rewritten. Jasmine walked through the marble-floored lobby, briefcase in hand, effortlessly poised. Every click of her heels echoed confidence, not arrogance, but the kind of deep-rooted, earned assurance of someone who had built her empire brick by brick, through sleepless nights, countless rejections, and ideas that were once laughed at and later bought for millions. The security guard at the front desk glanced at her badge, lips parting slightly in surprise. Maybe it was her age? She looked no older than 35. Maybe it was her glow, her undeniable presence? Or maybe he recognized her from a magazine cover. But he didn't say a word, just nodded and opened the secure elevator without question. As the elevator rose, her reflection in the mirrored walls didn't nibble on nerves. Jasmine wasn't nervous. She was focused. After all, she wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to lead. Upon reaching the top floor, the elevator chimed, and the doors opened into the executive corridor, Boardroom 11B. Behind those double oak doors sat some of the most influential decision-makers in the American tech industry. They were expecting someone, but not someone like her. The room was alive with chatter as she entered. Men in tailored Armani suits and Rolex watches laughed among themselves, exchanging inside jokes and venture capital gossip that floated above the heads of those not in the club. At first, no one really looked at her, at least not properly. Some glanced up, then quickly back to their screens. Others assumed she was there to set up something for the meeting to come. One even murmured, "Assistant from HR?" under his breath. Jasmine stood patiently by the door for a few moments. Silence never unnerved her. She let it stretch just long enough to create discomfort. But before she could introduce herself, it happened. One of the senior board members, silver-haired, wearing a $1,000 watch and the casual entitlement of outdated power, lifted his eyes briefly from his laptop and gestured toward the corner of the room. Without even the formality of eye contact, he said, "Hey, could you go grab us all some coffee, please?" For a split second, the room went eerily still. Another executive coughed softly. A paper rustled. One of the women at the far end of the table raised her eyebrows in stunned embarrassment. But of all the people in that room, Jasmine was the calmest. She walked slowly toward the side of the room, eyes scanning the coffee station. A smile played at the corner of her lips. She reached for a cup, then stopped. She turned back toward the table, and finally she spoke. Her voice was even but firm, each syllable as perfectly measured as every strategic decision she'd ever made. "Actually," she said, "I think you'll all want to hear what I have to say first." The man, still not fully understanding, tilted his head. "Excuse me." The chairperson of the board, an older woman who had remained silent but observant up to that point, suddenly rose from her seat. Her hands came together for a single loud clap to gain everyone's attention. "Gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce the woman standing before you. This is Jasmine Carter, our newly appointed interim CEO of Stanton Enterprises." The man who asked for coffee dropped his pen. The rest of the room blinked in stunned disbelief, struggling to align their assumptions with the reality now sitting, no standing, before them. Jasmine? CEO? Yes. The same woman they mistook for help was not there to serve them drinks. She was there to save their company. You see, Stanton Enterprises had been in trouble for months. Innovation stagnating, profits declining, morale plummeting. The board needed someone disruptive, someone bold, someone with a vision. And after a nationwide search and months of interviews, one name kept surfacing. Jasmine Carter. She wasn't from their usual mold. She didn't graduate from the same Ivy League club as them, though she had degrees from both Howard and Harvard. She wasn't brought in through nepotism, old money, or family name. She was self-made. Before 35, she founded 2 tech startups, both now unicorns. One she sold for $400 million, the other she took public. Her leadership was described in Forbes as equal measure fire and finesse. Her strategies were studied at Stanford. Still, the very moment she walked into that boardroom, none of that mattered. Because all they saw was a black woman in a suit. And to them she didn't belong. Until she opened her mouth, and the room shifted. In the days and weeks that followed, Jasmine didn't just occupy the corner office. She transformed it. She sat at the head of every table she walked into. Old leaders who clung to outdated strategies were replaced. Innovation returned. Profits followed. And more importantly, the culture changed. That room never forgot the mistake they made that day. Jasmine never mentioned the coffee incident again. She didn't need to. The next morning, a fresh pot of coffee appeared outside the same board member's office who had made the assumption, delivered with a respectful note. Next time, try asking me what I brew. In business. The lesson: never underestimate anyone based on what you think they're here to do. Because sometimes the person you're asking to serve was actually sent to take the lead. Born and raised in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, Jasmine Carter came into the world in a neighborhood where opportunity didn't knock. It whispered and many times never showed up at all. A place where dreams were considered luxuries, not expectations. Life wasn't fair, and it certainly wasn't easy. From a young age, Jasmine learned what it meant to make do with less while thinking about more. Her mother, a kind but relentless woman, worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Her uniformed grocery store shirt traded each evening for hospital scrubs at the night shift. Jasmine's father, a local mechanic with hands always smeared in grease, passed away suddenly when she was just 10 years old, casting a long and painful shadow over the rest of her childhood. But even at that age, something was different about Jasmine. While many around her seemed resigned to survive, Jasmine quietly decided she would thrive. She didn't sulk in silence or let her circumstances swallow her dreams. Instead, she turned pain into ambition, frustration into focus. With her books and spiral notebook always in hand, she would sit by the window of their small apartment, studying under the faint streetlight glow, pressing her way through every math problem, science chapter, and essay assignment like her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Her hard work paid off. Jasmine graduated at the top of her high school class and earned a full academic scholarship to Howard University. There she found her voice. She found community. She found strength in being unapologetically herself. A young black woman in tech before diversity initiatives made headlines. She didn't blend in, nor did she try to. She stood up. She stood out. With honors, she completed her degree in computer science, collecting awards and internship offers along the way. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. She applied to Harvard Business School with all the poise in the world, submitted her application with no family connections, no fancy corporate references, just merit, experience, and stories of transformation powered by her own resilience. She got in. Harvard was a different world. Polished buildings, prestigious professors, and peers who came from generations of privilege. First, it was intimidating. Jasmine worried she didn't belong. But it didn't take long for her to prove, first to herself and eventually to everyone around her, that she not only belonged, she elevated the room she was in. While others relied on family names or billion-dollar legacies, Jasmine brought her relentless grit, her laser-sharp vision, and business instincts few could match. She graduated top of her class, with recruiters from the world's biggest firms pleading for meetings. But Jasmine had other plans. She didn't want to fit into a system that rarely opened doors for people like her. She wanted to build her own. And that's exactly what she did. By the age of 29, Jasmine had launched her first tech startup, a platform designed to help young black entrepreneurs connect with investors and track their business growth. It began in her small rented apartment and was funded with a crowdfunding campaign, some personal savings, and an unshakable belief in her product. 2 years later, she sold the company for over $20 million. But she didn't stop there. Her second startup solved a major pain point in digital security, something even tech giants had overlooked. With cybersecurity on the rise and companies scrambling for smarter, faster, more accessible tools, Jasmine was ahead of the curve. She assembled a diverse team, pitched night and day, and within 5 years built a company so powerful it caught the attention of Silicon Valley titans. A bidding war began, and the winning buyer paid over $100 million for her innovation. By then, she had earned a reputation as a quiet storm in the industry. Not loud, not boastful, but precise, brilliant, and absolutely unstoppable. Mentions of her name circulated in venture capital circles and tech forums. Thought leaders called her a visionary. But even with all her success, Jasmine stayed grounded, mentoring young women, investing in inner-city education programs, and quietly planning her next move. That move came when Stanton Enterprises, one of the largest and oldest tech giants in America, began to crumble under its own complacency. Their innovations once led industries but had recently stalled. Outdated legacy software, a declining user base, and boardroom disagreements had cast a long shadow over their brand. Leadership changes came and went like revolving doors, none bringing the transformation they desperately needed. The board, under pressure from shareholders and the media, needed someone bold. Someone with a vision beyond balance sheets. Someone unlike anyone they'd ever hired. They didn't just need a leader. They needed a trailblazer. That's when they found Jasmine. At first, her name was met with confusion among some members of the old guard. She wasn't from one of their usual networks. She wasn't part of the old-school leadership circles. But the results of her work were undeniable. She had twice built something from the ground up, a trait none of their incoming CEOs had. She understood the future because she had created it. So they extended the offer. Jasmine Carter, the girl who once studied under dim streetlights in Atlanta, was now being asked to lead a billion-dollar empire into its next chapter. And while others may have been intimidated by the size of the challenge, Jasmine Carter looked at the opportunity like she always did, with the calm focus of someone who had already been underestimated and had already defied expectations. She didn't just take the job. She took control of the narrative. Rewind to that tense and unforgettable moment in the boardroom. The air was crisp with the aroma of rich, freshly brewed coffee in the corner of the executive floor. Jasmine Carter had just walked in, a woman with a mountain of accomplishments, dressed in elegance, wrapped in quiet confidence, and backed by a track record few in that room could even touch. But somehow none of that registered to them. To most of the executives seated around the oversized mahogany table, she was simply another face. Another assistant. Another someone from admin. With laptops open, ties adjusted, and stock reports glowing on tablet screens, none of them expected this poised black woman in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit to be anyone of consequence. They didn't ask her name. They didn't wonder what she was doing there. One man, middle-aged, graying at the temples, wearing a vest that shouted pedigree and privilege, barely glanced up before barking out, "Hey, could you go grab us all some coffee, please?" The words hit the space like a loaded silence, and for that single second time seemed to slow. Some executives smirked, more out of awkward reaction than intent. One woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly aware something about the assumption had just gone terribly wrong. But the man who said it, oblivious to the wave he just caused, went right back to scrolling through his notes. Jasmine, still standing with grace, gave a small smile. But it wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're flattered. It was the kind you offer when you know something they don't. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she turned toward the coffee machine, her eyes running along the corporate-grade espresso maker in the corner. She didn't move fast. She didn't react emotionally. She moved with purpose, the kind that doesn't rise to the bait of disrespect, but instead pulls control from the atmosphere. Just a few feet from the coffee station she stopped. Then slowly, like a chess player announcing checkmate before it's fully recognized, Jasmine turned back toward the room. Her hands were relaxed at her sides. Her gaze solid but calm. She glanced at the man who had made the request. "Actually," she said, her voice clear, even and composed, "I think you'll all want to listen to what I have to say first." That woke them. Heads turned more sharply now. The man frowned, glancing around, uncertain whether he'd misheard or worse, misunderstood just who he'd been talking to. A wave of confusion rippled through the room. What was going on? Who was this woman? Before anyone could speak, a chair at the head of the table pushed back and a woman stood up. She was the chair of the board, a no-nonsense leader who had watched the company decline from greatness into mediocrity over the last several years. She'd seen executives come and go. She had heard all the pitches, watched all the revamps, and sat through all the slogans that promised change but achieved nothing. But this was different. She motioned for quiet and addressed the room with her usual calm command. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a bell, "allow me the honor of introducing our newly appointed interim chief executive officer." She paused for a split second that felt like a lifetime. "Miss Jasmine Carter." Silence. Deafening silence. All screen tapping, whispering, and shuffling stopped. If a pin had dropped, it might have shattered the floor. The same man who had asked for coffee blinked in disbelief, his face turning a sharp shade of red. He opened his mouth as if to explain, perhaps to apologize, but no sound came out. His arrogance had already spoken for him. All the executives, seasoned and supposed veterans of industry, quietly recalibrated their impressions. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She just walked forward slowly, each step putting her in place not just physically at the table, but at the top of it all. She didn't need fanfare. Her presence said it all. She took the open seat at the head of the table, her eyes sweeping across the room in calm command. "Let's get started," she said. "No theatrics. No ego. Just business." What the board didn't realize until that exact moment was just how monumental this appointment really was. Stanton Enterprises, despite being one of the most prominent tech firms in North America, was failing. Years of outdated strategies, tone-deaf marketing, and resistance to change had left the empire rusting beneath its polished surface. They needed a transformation, not a tune-up. The board had spent months combing through candidates, analysts, influencers, global consultants. None seemed to have the mix of real-world experience, innovation, and courage to make the cuts that would save the organization. Until Jasmine. The board members who had met her before today knew what she was capable of. She had founded 2 successful startups, each sold for millions. She had turned tech on its head by marrying innovation with accessibility, strategy with empathy, leadership with cultural relevance. That's why they brought her in. But many of the people in that room, they had no idea. Until now. In the days that followed, Jasmine began dissecting the corporation from the inside out. People who had grown too comfortable were asked to step aside. Departments that had grown bloated with politics were trimmed. Innovation labs were restored. Marginalized employees who had been ignored for years suddenly had a champion at the top. Within months, the numbers started to rise. Morale followed. Investors came back to the table with confidence. And Stanton Enterprises transformed. As for the man who asked her for coffee, Jasmine never brought it up. But the next morning he found a single cup of coffee on his desk with a note attached. The handwriting was elegant, poised, unmistakably Jasmine's. It read, "For future reference, I prefer to lead with ideas, not espresso." And that was that. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes she's the one quietly taking notes, before taking control. Never underestimate the one you overlook. She just might be the boss you didn't see coming. Jasmine didn't waste a single second. From the very moment she officially stepped into the role of interim CEO, she began shaking the dust off Stanton Enterprises. To the outside world, the company still looked like a giant, a pillar in the tech industry. But inside those shimmering glass walls, it was crumbling. Innovation had slowed to a crawl. Products that once lived on the cutting edge were now relics compared to what competitors were building. Marketing pitches felt dated, recycled. And perhaps the most toxic of all, a culture that had grown stale, resistant to change, and blind to anyone who didn't fit a certain mold. Jasmine walked in with eyes wide open, and a strategy that no one saw coming. She didn't hold long-winded meetings to make people feel good. She didn't hand out thick reports filled with buzzwords. She evaluated, recalibrated, and acted with the precision of a surgeon and the instincts of a visionary. The first thing she tackled was the leadership team. She noticed immediately that the boardroom echoed with the same voices over and over. Men with decades-old perspectives, holding roles more out of habit than performance. She didn't blame them for the company's spiral, but she did hold them accountable. One by one, she began reshaping the executive tier. It wasn't personal, it was necessary. Those who clung to outdated practices, who had grown comfortable in their corner offices while innovation passed them by, were quietly shown the door. Some were shocked. Others challenged her authority, but they didn't last long. Jasmine made it clear. Complacency could no longer afford a seat at the table. In their place, she brought in bold thinkers, young talent with disruptive ideas, technologists who thought in algorithms and possibilities, product designers who dreamed in customer experience. But it wasn't just about age or skill, it was about diversity of thinking. Jasmine reached beyond the typical hiring pipeline. She pulled from HBCUs, tech boot camps, women in tech groups, and startup founders who'd built brilliance outside the spotlight. She gave people a shot who had never been invited into rooms like this before. Interns who used to make coffee were suddenly pitching ideas to the CEO. Engineers whose accents were once mocked during meetings now led task forces. She created panels not only for innovation but for inclusion. And unlike some leaders who used diversity as a buzzword, Jasmine used it as a blueprint. Departments underwent cultural audits. Communication channels that once excluded non-management staff were opened. Employee feedback systems were redesigned not to check a box, but to amplify real concerns and generate ideas directly from the workforce. Within months, creativity surged. Employees said they felt seen, many for the first time in their entire careers. And Jasmine? She stayed close to the ground. She didn't isolate herself in an ivory tower filled with executive perks. You'd find her in brainstorm rooms with junior developers, reviewing marketing ideas next to brand interns, or eating lunch in the cafeteria asking coders what tools would make their work better. But one of her boldest moves came 6 months into her leadership. Instead of playing it safe and polishing old products, she greenlit a brand new product line inspired by feedback from actual customers, something the company hadn't done in years. The product wasn't just technically smart. It was beautifully designed, inclusive in function, and intuitive for users from all backgrounds. Accessibility was built into its core. Jasmine even ensured the marketing campaign featured real users from different ages, races, and genders, not just stock photos and buzzwords. The media took notice. Tech blogs ran headlines calling it a Renaissance moment. Business reporters started showing up at company events again. And then the numbers followed. In just 12 months, under Jasmine's leadership, Stanton Enterprises stock surged by nearly 40%. Profits, once on a steady decline, shot upwards. Sales jumped, and partners who had previously backed away returned with interest. Some of the biggest names in business called it the beginning of a new era. Industry experts started dubbing the transformation the Carter comeback, a name now whispered in boardrooms as a case study in brilliant leadership. But for Jasmine, it was never just about the business metrics. Yes, growth was powerful. Yes, reversing the company's downfall was a major accomplishment. But to her, this had always been personal and purposeful. This was about rewriting a narrative. For so long, leadership in tech, especially at the executive level, had been an exclusive club. Homogeneous, guarded, and disconnected from the very world it claimed to serve. Jasmine had entered not just as a disruptor, but as a living contradiction to the stereotype of who gets to lead. She proved that brilliance and strength don't come with a specific look. That vision doesn't require a gray suit and 30 years in the same chair. That transformation doesn't have to be loud or flashy. It can be quiet, focused, intentional. She shattered stereotypes with her poise. She debunked assumptions with her results. And every decision she made was a statement. Leadership has no gender. Excellence has no color. And success has no stereotype. She stood not just for herself, but for the many people who had been passed over, talked down to, or silenced in rooms where they belonged just as much as anyone else. What Jasmine Carter built in that year went far beyond products or profits. She built something few companies ever manage to find again once they've lost it. Hope, authenticity, purpose. And somewhere along the way, she didn't just revive Stanton Enterprises, she redefined what a CEO could look like. And who has the power to build an empire? Because at the end of the day, Jasmine wasn't just making a comeback. She was making history. Today, Jasmine Carter is no longer just a tech mogul or a CEO. She's something far greater. She's a symbol, a living, breathing testament to what it means to rewrite history, not by shouting over it, but by stepping into spaces that weren't built for you and rebuilding them from the inside out. Her name carries the weight of transformation in technology, in leadership, and in culture. When she speaks at conferences, you don't just hear applause. You feel the breath of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people drawing in inspiration. Her journey, once sparked from quiet ambition in the streets of Atlanta, has now become the roadmap for an entire generation of young dreamers and doers who never saw themselves reflected in positions of power. Until Jasmine. But true to her character, she didn't just rise and close the door behind her. That was never her mission. After turning Stanton Enterprises into a modern-day success story and reviving its place on the map of innovation, Jasmine made a decision that surprised no one who knew her well. She founded a mentorship program, one focused specifically on equipping young women of color to enter the world of technology, not just as contributors, but as leaders, creators, founders, and visionaries. The program, called Code Forward, started small. A handful of high school students from underserved communities getting after-school training in coding, business fundamentals, design thinking, and emotional intelligence. But like everything Jasmine touched, it grew fast. Within 2 years, Code Forward had chapters in 10 major cities, with partnerships from universities, tech firms, and even global organizations. What started as simple mentorship sessions evolved into boot camps, internships, scholarships, and pitch competitions that unlock six-figure investments for teen entrepreneurs. Hundreds of girls have now graduated from the program. Some earned full-ride scholarships to Ivy League schools. Others landed jobs and fellowships at major tech companies by the time they were barely 21. And a few even started companies of their own. Businesses now on track to follow Jasmine's own incredible path, building products that solve real problems and giving voice to communities that are too often left out of the innovation equation. Ask any one of them what gave them their breakthrough moment, and they'll probably say the same thing. I saw Jasmine Carter speak, and I believed I could do it too. Yet, despite the mountain of accolades, magazine covers, and historic firsts, Jasmine remained fiercely grounded. Not because she didn't understand her impact, oh, she did, but because she knew that visibility was only half the battle. True change comes from action. Quiet, consistent, deliberate action even when the cameras are off. And maybe that's why she never publicly spoke about one of the most talked about moments from her rise, the now legendary coffee incident. 10 minutes before announcing her role as CEO of Stanton Enterprises, she was mistaken for the help. A senior executive, unaware of who she actually was, had casually asked her to pour coffee for the board. To this day, that story is still told in college classrooms, corporate equity trainings, and TED Talks about unconscious bias. But Jasmine? She never named the man. She never shamed him in interviews, never exaggerated the moment for attention or headlines. Though the assumption hurt, and though it represented everything she had worked so hard to erase, she understood that calling him out wasn't the lesson. Changing the entire system that allowed such assumptions to thrive? That was the real mission. But one small, quiet gesture still came through, and it said more than any viral statement ever could. The next morning, after her first official board meeting as CEO, a fresh cup of coffee was delivered to the same executive's office. No assistant, no cameras, just a single cup, still warm, sitting beside a folded handwritten note. For simple words. Never underestimate a black woman in the boardroom. He never spoke about it publicly, never denied it. But those who knew him well noticed he started listening more in meetings. He began supporting initiatives he once dismissed. And perhaps most importantly, he stepped back when it was time, and gave credit where it was owed. But again, Jasmine didn't do it for him. She did it for every woman who has walked into a room and been mistaken for the intern, the assistant, or someone from HR. She did it for every rising star who's had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. She did it because she understood the power of nuance, of dignity, of a well-timed reminder that true greatness doesn't need to yell. It simply shows up in command space. In the years that followed, Jasmine's name began to show up on lists with titles like the most influential leaders of the decade, women who changed business forever, and the builders of the future. But none of those titles mattered as much to Jasmine as the moments when a young girl would approach her after a speech and say, "I didn't think I could ever do it, until I saw you." And Jasmine, always calm, always collected, would kneel slightly, smile and say, "You already can. You just needed to be reminded." If you walk into her office today, there are no gold plaques or framed magazine covers hanging above her desk. Instead, there's a painting, abstract, dark blues, bold strokes of copper and black. Below it is a simple quote etched in rose gold. It reads, "I walked into the room they said I didn't belong in, and I built a door for the rest to come through." That is Jasmine Carter. Not just a CEO, not just a tech mogul, but a movement. And it all began the moment the world underestimated her. Don't forget to give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss more powerful stories like this.